Learn about the political achievements of past U.S. presidents in 34 minutes. Political accomplishments of George Washington's presidency. He promoted Vermont to become the 14th state of the United States. He appointed Henry Lee to quell the Whiskey Rebellion and used his constitutional power to pardon rebels for the first time. He averted war with Great Britain by appointing Chief Justice John Jay as negotiator for the Jay Treaty. He sent Wayne in command of the army to defeat the Northwest Confederacy in the Northwest Indian War, and by the Treaty of Greenville, opened 2/3 of Ohio to the United States. During the French Revolutionary War, he issued a proclamation declaring U.S. neutrality, desperately avoiding U.S. involvement in European war conflicts. Political achievements of the John Adams presidency. He insisted on the continuation of President Washington's policy of not getting involved in European wars, ignoring opposition within the Federalist Party, and appointing diplomats such as William Murray to go to France for peace talks, so that the U.S., which was still short of military power, succeeded in avoiding war. He attached importance to the construction of U.S. naval defense and was committed to promoting naval development, signing the Relief of Sick and Disabled Seamen Act, which authorized the establishment of a government-run maritime will. He signed a bill to promote the establishment of the Library of Congress. Marshall, nominated by him, served as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for more than 30 years, interpreting the Constitution with a thoughtful nationalist stance, establishing the equality of the federal government, the judiciary, and the legislature, and having an enduring influence on the Supreme Court. Political accomplishments of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. He signed the Military Peacemaking Act, which established the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and which created a new set of laws and restrictions for the U.S. military. He ordered 5 separate naval bombardments of Tripoli, leading to a treaty to restore peace in the Mediterranean. He completed the peace purchase of Louisiana, which doubled the size of the U.S. territory by 827,987 square miles. He organized a number of Western expeditions that yielded valuable information about the western frontier of the United States and laid the foundation for a policy of Western expansionism. Political achievements of James Madison's presidency. He led the War of 1812 against Great Britain, which ended in a stalemate, but which enhanced his reputation as president overall. On his initiative, the 14th Congress compiled one of the most productive legislative records in history to date. He authorized federal spending on the Cumberland Highway, which connected the western lands of the United States. He accelerated the decline of the Federalists by adopting several items he had previously opposed, such as the reconstruction of the National Bank, calls for increased spending on the Army and Navy, the establishment of tariffs designed to protect American goods from foreign competition, and the adoption of a constitutional amendment authorizing the federal government to finance the construction of internal improvements such as roads and canals, among other things. Political achievements of President James Monroe. He pushed for the Rush-Bagot Treaty with Great Britain, which averted a naval arms race on the Great Lakes and expanded trade between Britain and the United States. He pushed for the Russo-American Treaty, which limited Russian sovereignty over the southern part of the Pacific coast of North America to a parallel line of 54. 40. He pushed for the Adams-Onis Treaty with Spain, acquiring Florida from Spain. He introduced the Monroe Doctrine of non-interference with European countries, and it became the most important foreign policy principle of the U.S. government for a long period of history. During his term, 5 new states, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, Maine, and Missouri, were admitted to the Union. Political achievements of President John Quincy Adams. During his presidency, the U.S. government entered into reciprocal treaties with many countries, including Denmark, Prussia, and the Federal Republic of Central America, as well as commercial agreements with the Kingdom of Hawaii and the Kingdom of Tahiti. He pushed the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to investigate a range of potential improvements to roads, canals, railroads, and river navigation, and presided over the overhaul and further construction of national highways. During his tenure, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal was opened, the Dismal Swamp Canal in North Carolina was enlarged and rebuilt, and construction of the first passenger railroad in the United States, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, was completed. Shortly after he left office, The national road was extended from Cumberland, Maryland to Zanesville, Ohio. Political achievements of Andrew Jackson's presidency. A number of reforms were implemented during his presidency. He supported an act of Congress that set standards for widows of Revolutionary War martyrs to receive pensions from their deceased husbands. He pushed for a 10-hour workday in the nation's shipyards. He pushed the government into trade agreements with Russia, Spain, Great Britain, and Thailand, which led to a 75% jump in U.S. exports and a 250% increase in imports. On January 1, 1835, during his second term, the government paid off the entire national debt, an unprecedented feat in U.S. history. During his term, 2 new states, Arkansas and Michigan, were added to the Union. Political achievements of Martin Van Buren's presidency. During his presidency, dedicated to domestic harmony, the federal government negotiated 19 treaties with Indian tribes. In 1838, however, he instructed General Winfield Scott to forcibly transfer all Cherokees who had not yet complied with the treaties. He pushed for a diplomatic solution to financial disputes between U.S. citizens and the Mexican government, rejected an offer of annexation by Texas, and succeeded in avoiding a war with Mexico. He declared neutrality on Canadian independence, pushed Congress to pass and ratify a neutrality law designed to prevent U.S. citizens from engaging in foreign conflicts, and successfully averted war with Great Britain. In the case of Northern Maine, he met with the British minister to the United States and pushed for a diplomatic solution to the border issue, ultimately submitting it to arbitration and successfully maintaining peaceful relations between Britain and the United States. Political achievements of John Tyler's presidency. Immediately after Harrison's death, he was sworn in as president, exercising all the powers of the presidency, setting an important precedent for the orderly transfer of power after the death of a president, although it was not codified until the passage of the 25th Amendment in 1967. He pushed for the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which established the border between Maine and Canada and improved Anglo-American diplomatic relations. As a result of his intense lobbying, Congress passed a resolution for the annexation of Texas, and on March 3, 1845, the last day of his administration, Taylor signed the bill into law. On the same day, Florida was admitted to the Union as the 27th state. Political achievements of James Polk's presidency. He responded forcefully to Mexican opposition by completing the annexation of Texas, which in December 1845 became the 28th state of the United States. With the passage of the Independent Treasury Act, he re-established a federal independent fiscal system. He pushed the Walker Tariff Act into law, greatly reducing tariffs and boosting the prosperity of Anglo-American trade. Ignoring the risk of war with Great Britain, he pushed for the Treaty of Oregon, acquiring part of the Oregon Territory from Great Britain. Through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, he completed the acquisition of California and its ports. Political achievements of Zachary Taylor's presidency. He pushed for the signing of the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty in 1950. This treaty stipulated that neither the United Kingdom nor the United States would acquire or maintain exclusive rights to the proposed route of the Nicaragua Canal, that neither party would set up or maintain fortifications or control the area adjacent to the canal, and that neither party would engage in occupation, fortification, colonization, or the exercise of dominion in any part of Central America. The signing of this treaty created a situation in which the interests of both Britain and the United States in Nicaragua were shared equally, and to a certain extent contributed to the development of the Anglo-American alliance. Political achievements of the Millard Fillmore's presidency. He advanced the nation's infrastructure by signing bills subsidizing the Illinois Central Railroad from Chicago to Mobile and the Sault Ste. Marie canals. In the face of Napoleon III of France's attempt to annex Hawaii, he sent a strongly worded warning letter stating that the United States will not stand by and watch such acts, leading to France's eventual backing down. In the case of New Orleans, he chose to work with the Spanish on a series of measures to alleviate the crisis and avoid armed conflict. He pushed the Omnibus Bill through Congress, which mitigated a possible armed conflict between the territory of New Mexico and the state of Texas. and accepted the admission of California into the Union as a free state. Political achievements of Franklin Pierce's presidency. He supported Secretary of the Interior McClellan's push for departmental reforms to institutionalize departmental operations and expand paper records to track fraud. He expanded the authority of the Attorney General of the United States in the appointment of federal judges and prosecutors, and took an important step in the formation and development of the Department of Justice. He sent Gadsden to Mexico to buy land for future railway construction, and, through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, purchased for the United States an area that included parts of present-day southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. He promoted naval construction, adding 6 new steam frigates to the U.S. Navy during his tenure. He pushed the United States to sign reciprocal trade treaties with Britain and Japan, respectively. Political achievements of James Buchanan's presidency. During the Utah Rebellion, he sent Alfred Cumming, escorted by troops, to succeed the rebel leader as governor, and Thomas Kane as his personal agent to negotiate peace. The Jewish State War was successfully concluded. During his tenure, the construction of the transatlantic telegraph cable was completed, and he became the first person to receive an official telegram transmitted across the Atlantic. After prolonged negotiations with the British, he persuaded them to cede the Bay Islands to Honduras and the Mosquito Coast to Nicaragua, thus beginning to establish American hegemony over Central America at the expense of British interests. He pushed for the signing of the Treaty of Tientsin with China, which secured trade concessions for the United States. Political achievements of Abraham Lincoln's presidency. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in 10 states, not then under Union control, and providing exemptions in areas under Union control. He appointed General Grant to command the Union Army, refused to negotiate with the Confederacy as equals, and pushed for the Civil War to end with the surrender of the Confederacy. He established a national banking system through the National Banking Act. During his tenure, the United States issued the first dollar note with the color green on the back. In 1863, he proclaimed the last Thursday in November of that year as Thanksgiving Day. He approved the Yosemite Grant enacted by Congress, which provided unprecedented federal protection for the area now known as Yosemite National Park. Political achievements of Ulysses Grant's presidency. He signed a bill guaranteeing equal rights for blacks in the capital to serve on juries and in public office. He signed the Naturalization Act, which made it possible for foreign-born blacks to become American citizens. He used the military to pressure Georgia to secure black congressional deputies and pass the 15th Amendment. He pushed for the creation of the Department of Justice and supported the Attorney General in cracking down on the Ku Klux Klan. He pushed for the end of the Brooks-Baxter War and brought about the re-establishment of peace in Arkansas. He pushed for the successful settlement of the Alabama claims, which plagued Anglo-American relations, and kept the alliance between Britain and the United States at peace. He signed a bill creating the Commission on Unpaid Indian Affairs to oversee the President's Native American peace policy and reduce corruption. He ended the sovereign tribal treaty system and made it clear that the federal government was legally the guardian of every Indian. Political achievements of Rutherford B. Hayes's presidency. He worked for civil service reform, and when he could not push Congress to prohibit official hunts, he executive ordered that federal civil servants be prohibited from contributing to campaigns or engaging in partisan politics. He used federal troops to effectively quell the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, with no federal troops killed and no strikers killed. He authorized the army to pursue bandits fleeing into Mexican territory and negotiated cooperation with Mexico in the pursuit of the bandits, effectively mitigating the violent conflict situation along the U.S.-Mexico border. In an effort to mitigate native tribal conflict, he established a commission that ruled that the Ponca could choose their own settlement and compensate them for lands that had been set aside for the Sioux. Political achievements of Chester A. Arthur's presidency. He pushed for civil service reform, signing into law the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 16th January 1883, which called for the selection of civil servants on the basis of examination results. He presided over the revival of the U.S. Navy, supporting the new Secretary of the Navy, William Chandler's plan for naval development, abandoning wooden and canvas battleships in favor of steel frigate cruisers and armed dispatch steamers, and founding the Naval War College. In 1882, he signed into law the Edmunds Act, which made polygamy a federal crime and prohibited polygamists from holding public office and the right to vote. Political achievements of Stephen Cleveland's presidency. He opposed and consistently refused to comply with the Tenure of Office Act of 1867, leading to its repeal in 1887. He encouraged the idea of national integration and pushed for the passage of the Dawes Act, which diminished the role of tribal governments by allocating Indian lands to members of the tribes so they could sell the land themselves and receive funds. He supported Latin American countries against colonial encroachment and improved relations between the United States and its southern neighbors, while at the same time maintaining good relations between the two countries through friendly negotiations with Britain. He pushed the 53rd Congress of the Union to pass the Enabling Act, which allowed Utah to join the Union, and on 4th January 1896, the state became the 45th state of the United States. Political achievements of Benjamin Harrison's presidency. He enacted the Dependent and Disability Pension Act, which provides pensions to Civil War veterans regardless of disability. He signed the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first federal antitrust law, and initiated several lawsuits against multiple trusts during his term. He signed the Land Revision Act of 1891, authorizing the first forest preserve in Wyoming. He marshaled the country's technology to clothe the nation with a credible naval power, starting construction of 7 modern battleships with steel hulls during his term. He pushed for territorial expansion, and 6 new continents, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming, were admitted to the Union during his term. Political achievements of William McKinley's presidency. He led the Spanish-American War, destroying the Spanish Navy and forcing Spain to agree to negotiate a ceasefire and sign the Treaty of Paris with the United States, which led to the acquisition of Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. He pushed a bill through Congress to annex Hawaii and signed it into law. He pushed for the passage of the Tariff Act and signed it into law, which in part protected American industry. He pushed the Gold Standard Act through Congress and signed it with a gold pen, formalizing the gold standard in the United States. Political achievements of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. During his term, he filed 44 antitrust suits against unscrupulous trusts that restricted trade and charged unfair prices. He was the first president to help resolve labor disputes, pushing for arbitration to stop the 1902 coal strike after threatening coal operators with the intervention of federal troops. He quickly and decisively prosecuted corruption within the Indian Service, the United States General Land Office and Post Office departments. He attached great importance to the conservation of natural resources, pushing for the creation of the U.S. Forest Service, signing the bill creating 5 national parks, signing the Antiquities Act, and establishing the first 51 bird sanctuaries, 4 no-hunting zones, and 150 national forests. His successful mediation of the Japanese and Russian wars, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, also marked the emergence of the United States as a world power. Political achievements of Woodrow Wilson's presidency. He signed the bill that created the Federal Reserve System. In 1914, Wilson dispatched soldiers to help bring an end to the Colorado Coalfield War, one of the deadliest labor disputes in American history. In 1916, he pushed Congress to enact the 8-hour workday for railroad workers, which ended a major strike. He forced Congress to pass the Clayton Antitrust Act, which held individuals accountable when corporations violated the law and established clear rules for corporate behavior. In 1914, he proclaimed the second Sunday in May as the first Mother's Day in the United States. His articulation of the 14 Points for Peace was the only explicitly stated war goal of the nations involved in World War I and became the basis for the post-war Treaty of Versailles. Political achievements of the Warren Harding's presidency. He signed the tax bill, which pushed through tax cuts and massive deregulation, especially for low-income earners, contributing to the largest drop in unemployment and inflation in U.S. history. He declared that the United States was in the age of the automobile, signed the Federal Highway Act of 1921, and pushed for the development of the U.S. highway system, which injected massive amounts of capital into the U.S. economy. He brought about a change in the Wilkerson Prohibition, which successfully ended the Great Railway Workers' Strike of 1922. He pushed for the release of opponents of the war and continued to review cases and release political prisoners throughout his presidency, stating that this was necessary to return the country to normalcy. Political achievements of Calvin Coolidge's presidency. He pushed for several federal tax cuts through the tax bill, lowering tax rates and reducing spending and the federal debt. On 2nd June 1924, he signed the Indian Citizenship Act, granting U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans living on reservations. He vetoed the Curtis-Crisp Act on 2 separate occasions, stating that it would not help farmers and would only benefit exporters and expand the federal bureaucracy. He quickly recognized the new post-revolutionary Mexican government and appointed Dwight Morrow as ambassador to Mexico, successfully avoiding further conflict between the United States and Mexico. Political achievements of Herbert Hoover's presidency. He established the Research Committee on Social Trends to investigate American society as a whole. He established the Federal Bureau of Prisons and reorganized the Bureau of Indian Affairs to protect Native Americans from exploitation. He issued the Clark Memorandum, which rejected the Roosevelt Corollary and introduced non-interventionism in Latin America, ending the Banana Wars, ending the U.S. occupation of Nicaragua, and nearly ending the occupation of Haiti. Political achievements of Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency. He declared a 4-day national bank holiday that effectively alleviated the bank panic. He expanded federal agencies to provide economic relief and regulation. He signed the Social Security Act, which for the first time made the federal government responsible for the economic security of the elderly, the temporarily unemployed, dependent children, and the disabled. He aggressively expanded, funded, and promoted the national parks and national forest system, pushing for every state to have its own state park. He signed the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, renounced his right to unilaterally intervene in the affairs of Latin American countries, and also normalized relations with the Soviet Union. He formed the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which made the final decision on U.S. military strategy. He authorized U.S. nuclear weapons research and promoted the Manhattan Project. He pushed for the GI Bill to create massive welfare programs for returning soldiers. Political achievements of Harry Truman's presidency. His strong decision to use atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally forced Japan to declare surrender. Faced with the Soviet blockade of Berlin, he approved Ernest Bevin's plan to airlift supplies to the blockaded city. 11 minutes after Israel's declaration of statehood, he declared that he recognized the State of Israel. He issued 2 separate executive orders ending racial discrimination in the military and federal agencies. He signed the Marshall Plan, which provided $13 billion in reconstruction aid to Western Europe, including Germany. Political achievements of Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency. Upon assuming the presidency, he quickly ended the Korean War with the division of the North and South. He supported and promoted the establishment of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization as an alliance of anti-communist nations in Southeast Asia. He created NASA and signed the landmark National Defense Education Act. He pushed the federal government to use federal troops to enforce the Constitution in Arkansas for the first time, protecting 9 black students in an all-white public school, Little Rock Central High School. He issued an order denying McCarthy access to White House staff, thus establishing a tradition known as executive privilege and hitting McCarthy hard. Political achievements of John F. Kennedy's presidency. He successfully handled the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the missile sites and submit to United Nations inspections, and the United States publicly promised never to invade Cuba. He signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, an important milestone in early disarmament. He signed Executive Order 10925, which required government contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. It established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. He signed Executive Order 11063, which prohibits racial discrimination in federally supported housing or related facilities. he signed the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which amended the Fair Labor Standards Act and abolished wage disparity based on sex. Political achievements of Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. He signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was strengthened to further combat racial discrimination and segregation. He pushed through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited discrimination in voting, thus allowing millions of Southern blacks to vote for the first time. As a result of the act, the number of Southern blacks elected to state and federal office nearly doubled between 1968 and 1980, and the number of black elected officials nationwide increased from a few hundred in 1965 to 6,000 in 1989. He initiated and pushed for passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which sought to double federal education spending from $4 billion to $8 billion. Political achievements of Richard Nixon's presidency. In 1972, his visit to China ushered in a new era of Sino-American relations, in which the Soviet Union was forced to ease relations with the United States for fear of a Sino-American alliance. He pushed for the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, a temporary ceasefire in Vietnam, and the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. He traveled to the Soviet Union to negotiate with Brezhnev, and the two sides agreed to expand bilateral trade and reached two landmark arms control agreements, thus entering a new era of peaceful coexistence in U.S.-Soviet relations. In response to the Yom Kippur War in the Middle East, he forcefully ordered the U.S. military to go on Level 3 alert, with all U.S. personnel and bases on nuclear war alert, ultimately forcing Brezhnev to opt for concessions. Political achievements of the Gerald Ford's presidency. Immediately upon assuming the presidency, he issued Proclamation 4311, granting Nixon a full and unconditional pardon for any crimes he may have committed against the United States during his presidency. He issued Presidential Proclamation 4313, which instituted a conditional amnesty program for deserters who had fled to countries such as Canada and draft dodgers from the Vietnam War, with the condition that those who reaffirmed their allegiance to the United States would be required to serve 2 years in public service, or a total of 2 years for those who had less than 2 years of service in the military. He issued Presidential Proclamation 4383 in support of the Equal Rights Amendment and declared August 26, 1975 as Women's Equality Day. Political achievements of Jimmy Carter's presidency. Immediately after his inauguration, he issued Proclamation 4483, declaring an unconditional amnesty for draft dodgers from the Vietnam War. He signed the Department of Energy Organization Act of 1977, creating the U.S. Department of Energy. He signed the Department of Education Organization Act, creating the U.S. Department of Education. He expanded the Head Start program by 43,000 children and families, and doubled the percentage of non-defense funding for education. He pushed for the signing of the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, thus ending the war between the two countries. He announced full diplomatic recognition of the People's Republic of China and the establishment of full diplomatic relations between the United States and China. Political achievements of Ronald Reagan's presidency. He introduced the Tax Relief Act, which drastically lowered income tax rates while eliminating many loopholes in the tax system. The massive tax cuts ultimately contributed to the recovery of the U.S. economy, creating more jobs and generating more tax revenue for the federal government. He chose to confront the Soviet Union forcefully, pursuing a massive military expansion with the ultimate goal of winning the Cold War as his policy toward the Soviet Union, and formulated the National Security Decisions Directive of confronting the Soviet Union on 3 fronts, contributing in part to the formal collapse of the Soviet Union. He skillfully maintained the balance of U.S. relations between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, signing the August 17th communique with the People's Republic of China, stating that arms sales to Taiwan would be reduced, but at the same time offering Taiwan 6 assurances and a memorandum, stating that it would continue to implement the Taiwan Relations Act in accordance with the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Political achievements of George H.W. Bush's presidency. He pushed for German reunification with German President Helmut Kohl, negotiating and convincing Mikhail Gorbachev to agree to allow a reunited Germany to join NATO. He ordered the U.S. to invade Panama and overthrow the Noriega regime in that country. After the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, he pushed the United Nations and Congress to authorize the U.S. to launch military action against Iraq and persuaded the United Kingdom, France, and other countries to send troops to participate in the operation, which expelled Iraqi forces from Kuwait. With his support and impetus, the U.S. completed negotiations on the North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. He signed the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which requires employers and places of public accommodation to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, while providing exceptions when such accommodations cause undue hardship. Political achievements of Bill Clinton's presidency. He signed the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, which required large employers to allow employees to take unpaid leave for pregnancy and serious illness. He signed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993, which cuts taxes for 15 million low-income families, cuts taxes for 90% of small businesses, raises taxes on the wealthiest 1.2% of taxpayers, and calls for a balanced budget over many years through spending restraint. Asserting that free trade would lead to China's gradual acceptance of democratic reforms, he signed the U.S.-China Relations Act of 2000, which granted China permanent normal trade relations status. Political achievements of George W. Bush's presidency. He signed the No Child Left Behind Act, which seeks to measure and close the gap between the performance of rich and poor students, provide options for parents with students in low-performing schools, and direct more federal funds to low-income schools. He signed the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which seeks to protect Americans from health insurance and employment discrimination based on personal genetic information. He pushed for passage and signed into law the Medicare Act of 2003, which provides some assistance to beneficiaries in paying for prescription drugs while relying on private insurance to provide benefits. Political achievements of Barack Obama's presidency. He pushed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act through Congress and signed it into law. The bill calls for expanding Medicaid eligibility for people at 133% of the federal poverty level beginning in 2014, subsidizing premiums for people at 400% of the federal poverty level, providing incentives for businesses to offer health benefits, prohibiting denials of coverage and claims based on pre-existing conditions, establishing healthcare exchanges, prohibiting annual coverage caps, and supporting medical research. Through negotiations, he restored the détente between the United States and Cuba, which became known as the Cuban Thaw. Political achievements of Donald Trump's presidency. Negotiated to allow Japan to cut tariffs on about $7.2 billion in U.S. agricultural imports and to open Japan's market to U.S. agricultural products. He pushed the World Trade Organization to approve U.S. tariffs on $7.5 billion worth of European Union products annually as a countermeasure to the EU's unlawful subsidies to Airbus. He signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which permanently reduces the corporate tax to 21% and lowers the personal income tax rate until 2025, while increasing the child tax credit, doubling the estate tax exemption, and limiting state and local tax credits to $1,000. He brokered peace agreements between Israel and 5 Arab countries, including Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan. He forced Turkey to declare a ceasefire in northern Syria through the threat of economic sanctions. He reached and signed a conditional peace agreement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, announcing that U.S. troops would be gradually withdrawn from the country.